All right, we can be seated. So if we can have Miss Berry again. Come on up again, Miss Berry. You're still under oath. Have a seat.
Sorry.
Your Honor, may I inquire?
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Ms. Berry.
Good afternoon.
The day that Dylan's remains were found, the day it was definitively known Dylan remains had been found was the day that you went to Mark Redwine's house.
Correct.
And it had only been a couple of hours that the word was out that Dylan was definitively identified as the bones.
Maybe about 4 hours, because it was early evening, it was getting dark.
Okay. And it was a super emotional day, would you agree?
I would agree with that.
And you would agree that everybody was really upset, right?
Correct.
When you say everybody, you're talking about Denise Hess, Elaine Hall, right?
Yes.
And would you agree that Denise Hess was a journalist? She worked for the Pine River Times.
I would say that she definitely did work there, but as far as like active journalist, I don't think so.
Okay. Were you aware that she was Elaine Hall's media handler?
Yes.
And you knew that Denise Hess, the person who accompanied you to Mark Redwine's house today, his son's bones were definitively identified. You knew that Denise Hess booked national TV appearances for Elaine Hall, correct?
I knew that she helped book Dr. Phil.
Okay. Also, we're aware that Denise Hess booked local news appearances for Elaine Hall, right?
I don't know if I really knew that. I mean, I guess she did. She might have made a couple calls to people, but yeah, she did.
You were aware that Denise Hess ran Facebook groups that had to do with the disappearance of Dylan.
Yes.
And you're aware that one of those is called Warriors for Dylan?
I've never heard of that page.
The day that you went up there was the day that there was no longer any hope that Dylan was alive, right?
Looked that way, yep.
And would you agree that the parents, Elaine's worst nightmare, getting the message your child is not alive?
It's a pretty bad message to get, yep.
And Denise Hess, who you were with, was not just upset, she was angry, correct?
She was angry about the text message.
That's all I meant to ask. Pardon me for interrupting. You all went up there with 7 months of pent-up anger, right?
I believe that's what Denise said, not me.
You were with her and aware of her anger, yes?
Sure.
You don't live in Vallecito.
I do not.
Did not at the time.
Nope.
Denise Hess doesn't live up there.
She does not. She lives about 15 minutes away.
One reason you made the drive out that way was everybody was really upset and everything, and so her and I just drove by, right?
Well, she was going to drive by to confront Mark, so I went with her because I didn't want her to go alone.
You didn't just drive by, though. You stopped, as was discussed on direct, correct?
We drove by first time, and then we circled back, and when he was outside, we stopped.
The question was whether you stopped.
Yes.
I want to talk to you about just before you stopped, which you were just mentioning. You drove by the one time without any confrontation, correct?
He wasn't out there.
You flipped by one way and then you came back, right?
Correct.
And you were in your brand new BMW.
That's right.
Denise Hess told you 3 times to stop as you doubled back by, right?
Well, I didn't count, but she did tell me a couple times, yeah, more than once, I guess.
Over the lunch break, you had an opportunity to review a transcript, right?
Yes,
And in that transcript, you were speaking with Investigator Tanya Goldbright, right?
correct.
And there was some discussion about how many times Denise Hess told you to stop, right?
I think I read that, yeah.
Right. And my question to you was, she told you to stop 3 times. And do you not remember the answer?
I don't think that's the
I don't think I
right word.
remember how many
Hold
times.
on, when I talk, everybody has to be
Sorry.
quiet. I'm special. Okay? That's not the way to do it, Mr. Moran. You can ask her if that refreshed her memory.
Okay, I will move on to another question. You claimed to the police that you're terrified of Mr. Redwine. Do you recall that?
I was terrified that night.
And you did get an opportunity over the lunch break to review the transcript,
I did.
as you just mentioned. Do you recall that when you were speaking to Investigator Goldbright, at least, you said, "I'm terrified of the guy," without qualifying it as of that night, right?
Yes,
Right. But still, you stopped in front of his house, right?
I did.
And it was dark out,
Kind of dark.
dark enough that what you saw was his silhouette at first, right?
Yeah, well, when he was standing at the door.
And you mentioned on direct that your recollection is today that he was in his underwear standing at the door, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Some
But
boxer shorts.
You would agree that your statement back at the time that you spoke with Investigator Goldbright, it was closer in time to when this event occurred, right?
I think it was a couple months after.
Okay. It was closer in time than it is today.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And things were fresher in your memory on that day, correct?
I'm sure, yeah.
And you weren't being rushed by Investigator Goldbright, correct?
No.
She called to you. She wanted to speak with you. Is that right?
Yes.
So this wasn't a conversation where you were rushed into saying things, right?
No, I don't believe I was rushed. I was a little nervous, but
You knew that she was interested in what you had to say, and it was clear she was paying attention, right?
yes.
And the recording that you had an opportunity to review at lunch does not contain any reference to Mr. Redwine's underwear, right?
I probably didn't mention it.
If you'd like to review the transcript, I can give
I've
you an
already
opportunity
reviewed
to-
it, and I listened to it last night before I came.
And there's no mention of underwear in what you reviewed.
So does that mean that it didn't happen?
Stop, okay? I know you're a little excitable right now, okay?
I am.
Please wait till he finishes his
Okay.
question, and then take a breath before you answer for a
Okay.
couple reasons. One, I don't want you talking over each other, so everybody can hear the question and your answer.
Okay.
And two, she has to be able to take everything down, and talk at the same time, we can't do that.
All right.
Thank you.
It was very simply, you did not mention when you spoke to Investigator Goldbright that Mr. Redwine was in his underwear, correct?
I did not.
And
Sorry.
there was another remark that you made on direct examination, wherein you said that Mr. Redwine was laughing. Do you recall saying that in direct examination?
Yes.
But you did not say that to Investigator Goldbright when things were fresher in your memory, correct?
I don't recall.
Okay. Would you like to look at your transcript, and I can give you an opportunity to refresh your recollection?
No, I really don't recall, but I may not have told her that.
Would it refresh your recollection as to whether or not that happened, this thing that you're not recalling right now?
I
Did you
know
look
that
at
it
the-
happened.
Did you tell Investigator Goldbright when it was closer in time that it happened, is my question then?
I don't recall that I told her every single thing that happened that night. I was a little bit intimidated to really talk about it. I wasn't sure. I thought I was in trouble. I told her, what I remembered at the moment.
But she set your mind at ease, didn't she? She told you that you were not in trouble.
Yes.
And you thought maybe you had been in trouble because you were aware that you committed crimes at Mr. Redwine's house.
I didn't
Hold on,
commit any crimes.
You can be quiet, and when somebody objects, you have to be quiet also. Now I forgot what this question was, just a second. You want to state your objection?
This is argumentative and inaccurate.
Well, I don't know if it's inaccurate or not. Did you feel like you might have committed a crime? And I don't want you to say whether you did or not.
Me?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Moran.
Did Tanya Goldbright tell you that you were not in any trouble?
She did.
Okay. And you would agree that when she called you, you were nervous, wondering if you were in trouble, right?
I've been wondering if I'm in trouble for 9 years.
Mr. Redwine was in his home, and then Denise Hess yelled something, correct?
Yes.
And once Denise Hess yelled something, Mr. Redwine exited the sanctuary of his home.
He did.
So he came out the door, and that's when you saw his silhouette, right?
I saw his silhouette before he came out the door, when he was standing at the door. When she yelled, he came out the door. The silhouette was when he was still in the door.
When he came out of the house, you could see that he was mad,
He was
correct?
angry, yes.
The first thing Denise Hess yelled was, "Hey, Mark, you fucked hard," right?
I believe so, yes.
And then Denise went on. She yelled, "I'm going to spend my last breath making sure that you pay for what you did to Dylan," right?
Yes.
And as she yelled that, you were close enough that you could see the whites of Mr. Redwine's eyes, right?
No.
So your testimony today is that you could not see his silhouette, or you could not see his silhouette after. In the dark, you were close enough that you could see the whites of his eyes, right?
It wasn't that dark.
Okay.
Kind of dark.
And this guy that you're terrified of in the kind of dark is mad, and then he came at you, right?
No, that's not really how it happened, no.
He didn't throw the log, right?
He did not.
When Denise Hess started yelling through, though, he was in his home, as you discussed. That's accurate?
I believe he was stepping foot out of his home after, when we pulled up and he saw us, he stepped out. I really don't recall whether she yelled before. I mean, maybe she said something before, but he came out the door.
And then he was yelling too, right?
He was. They conversed for several minutes. I mean, they knew each other from the conversation.
Okay. Wait for a question, please.
Okay.
Would you agree that then he began screaming?
He was doing a combination of laughing, cursing, and yelling. It was rage and laughing and cursing. It's weird.
He also screamed, "Fuck you," right?
Several times.
You did not stop there, though, right?
Pardon?
You didn't stop there, though. Denise kept interacting with him?
Oh, I thought you said me.
Denise.
Oh, Denise continued to interact with him, correct.
And what she was saying was, she was never going to let him forget.
Well, that was one thing.
And then Mark ramped it up from there and yelled that he hoped Denise would die of cancer, right? Denise had.
I believe that he did, yes.
And so from screaming, "fuck you," and all of this other interaction to a low blow about her cancer. Is that right?
Well, he called her the C word a couple times.
That wasn't the question, but that helps.
Oh, I'm sorry, but it was a lot of cursing and back and forth between them both.
So he's mad, screaming, bringing up
Sure.
cancer, and then you lose your mind, right?
I did when he said that he was going to, or that he was something about her dying and something about her cancer and that he couldn't wait for her to die or something. I don't know the exact words, but yes, at that point, I unclicked my seatbelt and I jumped over the top of Denise Hess and I called him a shit eater.
And that's the point where you lost your mind, right?
Well, I was pretty mad, yes.
You pretty much stayed out of it until that point, right?
I didn't say a word.
And when he flew over the seat, he started moving backwards, right?
No.
Okay. It was when you flew over the seat that he picked up a log. Yes.
He was in the driveway, and when I came over the seat, he came closer. He picked up a log, which is at that time when I saw the white of his eyes, not a silhouette. And he picked up the log over his head like he was going to come at us, and that is when Denise told me to go.
Okay. So he's in the driveway, not the yard.
I don't know, it's kind of part of the yard. There's like a grate thing right there.
Uh-huh.
He was right around there, somewhere in I don't know, the driveway, the yard.
Okay. And
He was on his property.
Okay. He didn't jump over the creek, right?
I don't believe so, but I'm not really sure. No, he didn't jump anything.
After he grabbed the log, you were terrified, right?
I was.
And you stopped screaming, right?
Yeah, I jumped back in my seat.
And you decided to leave, right?
I did, yes.
And Denise was saying to you, drive right now, right?
Yes.
So the log worked to get the two of you from out in front of his house, right?
Yeah.
Yelling at you didn't make you leave, did it?
Well, he wasn't yelling at me. He was yelling at Denise.
Didn't make you leave, did it?
It did not.
Screaming didn't make you leave, did it?
Nope.
A rotten remark about cancer did not make you leave, did it?
No.
It was the log.
Yeah.
One thing you were concerned about was damage to your new BMW, right?
Yes, I bought it the day before.
It wasn't a convertible, was it?
No.
Nobody was leaning outside the car?
Well, he could have, no, nobody was leaning outside the car.
Right, he could have reached his hand in the car and bonked someone in the head, right?
Well, he could have.
You managed to get your new BMW out of there unscathed.
I did.
Mr. Redwine was close enough that he could have thrown the log, right?
Sure.
He didn't, though.
No, he restrained himself.
But more than throw it, he was right there. He could have just straight hit someone with it, right?
Yeah, I saw him stop and think about it.
You saw the whites of his eyes get bigger. He was so close, right?
They were huge.
So close that you had to, quote, frickin' hit the gas and frickin' flew out of there, right?
Yep.
And you were crying.
I was crying.
I mean, he was coming at your brand new BMW. That's all you knew.
Yeah.
Right?
I knew he couldn't get me, but he could get,
close enough that he could have hit you with that log. Yep.
he could have hit my car or Denise, not me.
You weren't so bold as to trespass, though. You didn't go on his land, right?
I didn't go on his land, no, sir.
Showing you You and Denise acknowledge that you provoked Mr. Redwine, is that right?
I believe those words came out of the mouth of Denise Hess.
And you both knew you shouldn't have provoked him, right?
I didn't know that.
And did anybody at any point ever tell you what happened was a crime?
No. In fact, Tanya Goldbright told me I wasn't in trouble.
Your conversation with Tanya Goldbright, she was the investigator, right?
She was.
She extended a warm thank you to you, right?
I guess.
And you thanked her, didn't you?
I did. She worked hard.
You knew that Tanya Goldbright was the lead investigator, right?
I did.
And your impression was that Ms. Goldbright becoming the lead investigator was a good development, correct?
I have never said that. At least I don't recall saying that.
You felt like she'd focused on Mr. Redwine, and you believed it was a good thing that she was taking over the case, right?
I don't even really know when she took over a case. I always thought she was in charge of the case. I didn't know she took over anything.
You wanted her to know that it felt like all of a sudden things were happening.
Yeah, I did feel that way.
She got involved, right?
She was involved from the day that, as far as I know, from day one. I didn't know that she took over anything.
You remember saying, ever since you got involved, it's like all of a sudden, it's like we're seeing things happening.
I really don't recall saying that. I saw that on the statement, but I don't recall her getting re-involved in the case. In my memory, Tanya was always the investigator in this case, but I know that she was involved in the search and was part of finding him, and I believe that that's what I was referencing, that she was there that day. But I don't recall her not being part of the case.
Fair to say, though, this is 8 years ago, so the transcript's probably a better history of what was actually said
I
that
read
day.
them.
Yeah, and you would agree that that's on the transcript at least?
It is.
Okay. Beg your pardon, Your Honor. I gave copies of this away that have my notes on it, so. Here it is. Oh. You, when you were speaking with Investigator Goldbright, thought to say, is that what you did to Dylan, right?
I did say that. I did.
So at the point you're outside Mr. Redwine's house yelling at him, you knew about some pictures, right?
I did.
Do you recall saying to Investigator Goldbright, after saying thank you, that we would not have come this far without you?
I don't recall saying that, but I did read it in the transcript.
Did that refresh your recollection?
No, it really didn't.
Are you disputing the accuracy of this after having...
I'm not at all. I just don't remember saying it.
I see. Did you remember saying it when you listened to the recording last night?
I don't recall saying that.
So even when you're listening to your own voice on a recording, you're not able to make out that that's something
You know,
you said?
I don't recall I don't recall saying that. I'm sure that I did.
Because you're recorded saying it.
Yeah.
And when you say we would not have come this far, what we means is yourself, right?
Yeah.
Denise Hess, correct?
I can't speak for Denise Hess.
Okay. When you say we, are you talking about Elaine Hall?
No. We, the Warriors, Dylan's Warriors, that's what I believe I meant.
Dylan's Warriors Facebook group?
No. There is no Dylan Warrior
You
Facebook group.
told Tanya Goldbright, thank you from everybody, right?
Yeah, can you get off this point?
Objection, asked and answered.
I mean, we've done it and done it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Moving on. Who told you about the pictures?
Denise Hess.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Any redirect?
Thank you, Your Honor. So Ms. Berry, let's take a step back for a second. Did you ever physically threaten Mark Redwine?
No,
Did you ever go on Mark Redwine's property?
never.
But you did go there and the two of you yelled at him.
Yes,
And when you went there, counsel asked you about a transcript, and you reviewed that transcript recently.
yes,
And he asked you about page 5 of that transcript, when he asked you if Denise Hess had said something to Mark about Dylan specifically, right? Remember that line of questioning?
yes,
The counsel asked you the part about where you said, and then she said something about Dylan, and about, she would never, let him forget what he did, or whatever, right? Do you recall that?
yes,
And then do you recall counsel next jump to, you saw the whites of his eyes after that?
yes.
May I approach with the transcript, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, if I may, what is the purpose of showing her the transcript?
I assume there's something different in the transcript than what was testified to. Is that correct, Mr. Johnson? Okay, go ahead.
So, Ms. Berry, with regard to your interview,
Mm-hmm.
a practice where counsel asked you that first point, or counsel asked you that second. You see that there?
Mm-hmm.
Can you please read to the jury what?
Your Honor, I'm not certain how this is a permissible way to admit evidence.
So, yeah, why is she allowed to read her transcript?
See the point where Mr. Moran asked you about Denise Hess making comments about Dylan specifically,
Yes,
and then you see where the whites of the eyes.
right.
Refresh your recollection of all the events you see that.
Yes. Okay.
And would you ask your question from the lectern?
Ms. Berry, was it in response to comments about Mr. Redwine being responsible for Dylan's death that led to the whites of the eyes, or something else?
It was, okay, could you please ask me that one more time?
Yes. Counsel asked you about Denise Hess's comments to the defendant, suggesting that he was responsible for Dylan's death. Remember that?
Yes.
Is that what set him over the edge, or was there something else in that transcript in between there?
That did not set him off. He was laughing about that.
Then what was said prior to?
Your Honor, if I may, that is not in the transcript. I have no explanation for what is happening here, how this is a way to admit a transcript.
Well, he's not admitting the transcript. He refreshed her memory. He's asking questions about this conversation, so he's allowed to do that.
If there's going to be further discussion of the transcript, I would ask that it be admitted then, rather than just reading it into the record.
Well, I don't know if it's going to be read into the record or not. What are your plans, Mr. Johnson?
Judge, I'm happy to stipulate that the transcript goes into evidence if that's really what counsel wants. My point is slightly different. The witness described a series of events, and counsel went from one event and associated with the incorrect event.
I think that's appropriate. You can do that.
Your Honor, I moved on from it because the document I provided to counsel has the numbers I was looking for, but if that's the proceeding, I withdrew that question and moved on and would request that we provide this transcript. We're going to go any further down this road.
Well, if you want to provide the transcript, you can, but Mr. Johnson can ask the questions.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I'm going to try to get back to just where we were. Denise Hess accused the defendant of being responsible for what happened to Dylan, right?
Yes.
Is that what set him off and caused him to pick up a lock?
No.
What happened after that comment that set him off to pick up a lock?
After he made the comment about her dying, of cancer, of whatever it was, and that is what drove me to scream out the window at him after I unbuckled my seatbelt and flew across the seat. And that is when I saw the whites of his eyes, not before.
What comment was it in, what comment was it in relation to that set him off specifically?
A shit-eating shit-eater, I believe, is the comment that he responded to.
Before that, no log.
No,
And before that, no whites of the eyes.
no.
But that set him off.
Oh, yes.
Ms. Berry, did you call the police in this case, or did they call you?
They called me.
Did you ever try to get the defendant arrested or in any kind of trouble for this?
No, no.
Would you even have called them if they didn't
I'm
reach
going to
out to you?
object and move for that question and answer to be stricken. The question wasn't permissible from the defense and shouldn't be from the prosecution. If there was a crime here, it was not Mr. Redwine who was in his home.
No, that's not what your question was. She was allowed to answer your question. Mr. Johnson is trying to show that this is not a vindictive action on her part because she didn't contact the police. I think it's permissible. Go ahead. I think I actually ruled on it earlier because I remember having this conversation with you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
A long time ago. Yeah.
Did you try to get Mr. Redwine in trouble, or did you just answer the questions that the police asked you?
I just answered the questions.
It was a relatively short conversation.
Maybe 10 minutes, yes.
And is that where you explained that you were shaking and crying and scared because he had come towards not just your vehicle, but you specifically mentioned Denise Hess, who was on that side of the car as well?
Correct, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. I have no more questions.
Anything from the jury? Well, first of all, did you want to make that an exhibit or not? Okay. Would you, let's mark it now. If we don't
I think
forget.
the court may have the copy I was looking for. The copy in my hand now has notes on it.
I'm hoping the DA is going to pass you down a copy, but I don't know.
I've provided them a copy as well.
I have a copy. There are highlights and a
All
couple
right.
markings.
Well, let's just not forget, because one of us will. Just a second. Anyway, the jury can pass down their questions if they have any. And do you have a specific number that you want to call this? Your last, we can go to the end, I hope. Your last exhibit is 1895, at least in my book. I don't know if you've changed since.
1900, please.
All right. And let's make sure we have that by the end of the day, all right? Okay. Okay, questions down to, no questions? Okay, thank you. Can this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you. You're free to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the people call Investigator Tom Cowling.
All right. Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let's see.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please start by introducing yourself to the jury by your full name?
My name is Tom Cowling, last name spelling of C-O-W-I-N-G.
And where are you employed, Mr. Cowing?
The Plata County Sheriff's Office.
And what is your current rank there, so I can call you by the correct title?
Lieutenant,
Thank you, sir. How long have you been at the La Plata County Sheriff's Office as a peace officer?
23 years.
23?
Yes.
And were you involved in the investigation of Dylan Redwine's disappearance?
Yes.
Now, for purposes of today, I'm going to stick to one specific topic. I'm sure the jury will hear from you again, but I want to stick to one topic for today. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Were you tasked with reconstructing the living room from the defendant's home?
Yes.
Had you been in the defendant's home before?
Yes.
More than once?
Half a dozen times.
And had you been in the defendant's home on some of the earliest days before a search warrant was even executed?
Yes.
And then were you also present on November 29th of 2012 when a search warrant was executed?
I was.
And then subsequent to that, had you been in the defendant's home for other investigatory purposes?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to observe the furniture layout in that room?
I did.
And did you have an opportunity to see with your own eyes the size of that room?
Yes.
Is the size of that room something that maybe the jury will hear about later on in terms of the investigation, et cetera?
Correct.
So let's talk about how you reconstructed that room. When you were present, were photographs taken at the time of that search warrant?
Yes.
Have you reviewed some of those photographs?
Correct.
Judge, at this time, I'd ask you to approach with People's Exhibit 71 and People's Exhibit 72.
You may.
Counsel, I believe. So, Investigator Cowing, do you recognize People's Exhibit 71 and People's Exhibit 72 in the room that's photographed there?
I do.
Is that the defendant's living room?
It is.
Are those fair and accurate pictures of how the defendant's living room appeared on November 29th of 2012?
They are.
Is it also consistent with how that living room appeared in terms of the size of the room, the walls, the furniture, as it was in those earliest days of the searches for Dylan when you observed it?
Yes.
Was the furniture at some point in the investigation collected?
It was.
And where was it stored?
The Plata County Sheriff's Office at 742 Turner at the time.
And then did you also at some point in the investigation take some measurements of that room?
Yes.
Now, in the interest of being accurate, how did you do the measurements that you did?
I used a handheld laser measure device.
Okay. When did you take those measurements?
August 14th, 2013.
And Investigator Cowing, were those measurements of the walls and the doors and things within the home that wouldn't have changed over the course of months?
Correct.
Right. Judge, at this time, I'm going to ask you to approach with People's Exhibit 124.
All right, go ahead.
Exhibit 124 before?
Yes.
Is that a diagram with measurements that you took?
Yes.
And were they input into the into a computer system to make it look a little better than a sketch?
Correct.
Is that derived from a sketch that you had done?
Yes.
And then is the furniture generally placed, not to scale or measured, but generally placed in terms of where it was on November 29th of 2012?
Yes.
Did those measurements assist you in setting up the general living room reconstruction?
Yes.
And then did you also have additional diagram from someone who had done sketches at the FBI back at the time of the search warrant?
Yes.
Did that have measurements as well?
It did.
Now, in your diagram, are there some measurements that are there and some that aren't?
Correct.
Did you have enough measurements from all of this information we've talked about, 71, 72, 124, and other diagrams in the case to put together generally how the living room looks.
Yes.
But at this time, I'd move to admit People's Exhibits 71, 72, and 124 into evidence.
Any objection?
Your Honor, I'm looking at what we were provided. I don't think that we've got 71, 72. I believe I know what it looks like, but if I could
May I
take a look
approach it?
Yeah,
for-
yeah, go ahead.
Does the court have that copy?
I have them. We do have one.
No objection, thank you.
Okay, so that was 71, 72, and 124? Yes, sir. Oh, they're in.
Thank you, Your Honor. So Investigator Cowing, I want to make sure that we're giving the jury the accurate impression here. So is this a reconstruction down to the inch of that living room?
Not down to the inch, just approximation.
Okay. So it's a reconstruction that gives them, does it give them the general feeling for the size of the room?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that it might be off a few inches here, a few inches there?
Correct.
Like, for example, were you using that photograph as a visual aid to place the furniture?
Yes.
And the couch may be a little this way, things like that.
Correct.
But having been in that living room several times, do you believe it's an accurate reconstruction just in terms of giving them a sense for the size of that room?
Absolutely.
And then where things would have been located at the time that Dylan Redwine went missing?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I would hand it over to defense counsel for cross-examination, and then I would, go from there.
I understand. Go ahead.
Your Honor, if I may, I think it makes sense to approach on this.
Sure.
Hello again, sir. Good
Wait.
afternoon.
Hello?
Sorry. The occasion you were first in the house where, and as you were just testifying on direct, the house looked like you're trying to set it up across the hall here. That was November 20th, 2012, right? That's what you're meaning to recreate is what it looked like the day you were in there, November 20th, 2012. So best approximate November 18th and 19th, 2012, right?
Correct.
And the reason you were in the house on November 20th, 2012 was in part to look for Dylan Redwine, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Redwine was very accommodating when you went to his house. Would you agree?
Yes.
He welcomed you and other sheriff's employees into the house, correct?
Correct.
Objection beyond the scope, Your Honor.
Mr. Moran?
This informs the way the house looks, what they were doing in there. I
Not
think
really.
it's related.
I mean, he welcomed you and others into the house. That doesn't have anything to do. I mean, you'll be able to question him again. He's going to come back if you want to get to some of the stuff.
Yes. Just a couple more questions on what you're observing in the house. So when you're in the house, you looked on November 20th, 2012. You're looking in every closet, and that informs how you know the house so well and can recreate it across the hall, right?
Yes.
You looked in every dresser drawer on that day, right?
Yes.
Looked in boxes, correct?
Yes.
Looked in bins.
Yes.
You looked at vacuum filter and vacuum.
This is
Mr.
beyond the
Moran,
scope.
this is basically void R on the diagram, or on the recreation. That's what you're allowed to do at this point. If you have anything else, you can save it for later.
Okay.
Whether or not it comes today or at a different time, I don't know.
Investigator Cowing, you would agree that what is across the hall does not have all of the belongings that you observed in Mr. Redwine's house, is that right?
Can you clarify?
Sure. It's missing the armchair, or end tables, television, stand the television was on, correct?
Correct.
It's also missing a Nerf football, is that right?
Correct.
And it's missing the debris that had accumulated on surfaces in that house, correct? The diagram as I viewed it yesterday, if there haven't been any modifications to it, has the couch out a ways from the blue tape. But when you were in Mr. Redwine's house, it wasn't like that, right? The couches would have been up against the wall, correct?
I don't recall.
Do you recall that the couches sort of stood out in a way that was unusual, that they were farther from the wall than is typical?
They are reclining couches.
I see. Both couches are, so that's why you think they're out from the wall a little bit?
Yes.
So then the end tables and the other items would have been closer to the wall, fair?
Yes.
And it's been brought to your attention that the measurements are off with respect to the blue tape across the hall from the measurements you took on August 4th, 2013. I'm sorry, August 14th, 2013.
In particular, can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Sure. There was some discussion yesterday that the measurement was off, and I wonder if that had been relayed to you and if there had been any effort to fix that.
I haven't heard.
Okay. But suffice to say that this is meant as an approximation. You're not testifying that I did the walls and spaces perfectly, right?
Correct.
And by my estimation, the door is a little off. Would you agree? The door is not as big as the door you saw. The door you're outlining in blue tape.
Correct. It's just an example,
And when you were taking measurements, you're measuring walls as you described on direct, right?
Yes.
But you're not measuring the distance, the couches from the coffee table, right?
Correct.
And you didn't measure on that day the distance the couches are from each other.
No.
So bottom line on this is it's best to go in there with the notion that this is an approximation, kind of shows you what the furniture look like, right?
Correct.
And it's similar in how it appeared to you in November 2012 because there's no obvious evidence of a crime on it over across the hall, right?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Sure. As we look at it, we will not see anything that is obvious indication of bloodletting on those surfaces, correct?
Nothing with the naked eye, no.
And,
With the naked eye.
and that's, of course, how it appeared to you on November 20th, 2012, right?
Correct.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's all I have on this particular issue with this witness.
So, Judge, I actually would like to redirect briefly.
You may.
And I realize, Investigator, I didn't publish those exhibits that I introduced to you. Did I publish those yet?
Yeah.
I just want to briefly show 124. So, Investigator, I'd just like the jury to see what we're referring to. So, People's Exhibit 124, is this an example of that diagram that you created that's dated for the layout on November 29th, 2012?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And this will be in evidence for them later. People's 71. Is this People's 71 that I handed you?
Yes.
So Mr. Moran's correct, all the furniture is not in the reconstruction, correct?
Correct.
Was all of the furniture seized by the police department or only those specific items?
Just those specific items.
And so that the jury knows what they're looking at when they go to see the reconstruction, the edges of the wall are going to be indicated by the blue tape.
Correct.
And you went in there with a tape measure and you measured it the same as you measured it, right?
Yes.
We just want to be careful not to represent it as necessarily exact, right?
Correct.
And then I'll go to People's Exhibit 72 as well. Does this show that same living room with the context of the door as well?
Yes.
So what are the items that you did have in police custody that you were able to reconstruct for the jury?
So we took into custody the couch against the north wall.
And is that, to orient the jury, is the north wall the couch that's on the left of the screen?
Correct. There's a painting above it.
Thank you.
We seized the couch against the east wall where the window is,
And what else?
the coffee table, and the rug underneath it.
Thank you, sir. And then there's some other furniture and things within the room, correct?
Correct.
Does that impact the size of the room for purposes of the jury's viewing?
No,
If anything, it makes it tighter in there, does it not?
it does.
Thank you, Investigator Cowling. I have no more questions.
All right. I've already made a ruling on this, and I have determined, that the jury will now go and view the reconstruction, of, the defendant's living room. You're gonna go as a group. You will be going with the bailiff. While you were there and while you're in transit, you can't discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. You can't ask any questions of the attorneys or the people who are gonna be in there. The only people at this point who will be in there will be the attorneys, Mr. Redwine, myself, and Aaron. We're gonna go over there first to make sure that, we're the only ones there. And then, I'll have Aaron come get you. The purpose of this viewing is to assist you in understanding and applying the testimony you hear and the exhibits introduced at this trial. So with that, we'll go off the record and go across the hall. Okay, looks like we are all back in the courtroom. The record can reflect that the jury went over to Division 5, which is Judge Carlson's courtroom. We took a break at 2:11. The attorneys and Mr. Redwine first gathered in that courtroom. It took a little while for the jury to come over. We got back at, well, we were done viewing the jury was done viewing the courtroom mock-up at 2:11, according to the clock in Judge Carlson's courtroom. The jury was not there the whole time. So, is there any record can also reflect the jury was asked to take as much time as they wanted. They did not talk to anybody. Nobody talked to them other than me to tell them to look and see what you want to see. So, is there any other further record you decide wants me to make since we didn't have the reporting ability over there?
I'm sorry, Mayor.
Yes.
You said we left the courtroom at 2:11?
According to the time stamp on the real time.
Yes, sure. And then, I believe Your Honor said the jury finished doing the...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I wrote it down wrong, and now I said the same thing twice, didn't I?
Yes, sir.
And now I forgot. Was it 2:17? Is that what we?
You said 2:17,
think that's correct. Is that right? And that was after the jury had left the 217? Correct. Okay. Thank you. Anything for the record from the defense?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Point.
And so you're done with Mr. Cowing, for now, or not?
Yes, Your Honor.
But he's not released yet, correct?
No, he'll be available for later.
Okay.
Your Honor, I did learn something that I think is pertinent to these issues, with respect to the questioning I did and what kind of couches those are.
Yeah, and?
I would like to inquire of Investigator Cowing, because as it stands now, it's not accurate. That these are,
Just briefly, I'll see where you're going with this. Go ahead.
Investigator Cowing, that we had some discussion about the distance between the couch and the wall, and you mentioned that they were reclining couches.
Yes.
And are you aware of these types of couches that are called wall-away couches, so that they can be up against the wall?
Not aware.
So you couldn't say whether those couches are the type that could be up against the wall?
I don't know that.
Thank you.
All right. Go ahead.
So, Investigator Cowing, just so that I'm making a clear record about this, the couches have a little slant at the back of them, right?
They do.
And what Mr. Moran's pointing out is that the blue tape was behind the couches by a little bit of distance, correct?
Yes.
But the top of the couch on the slant, even if it's not exactly lined up with the blue tape, is closer to the blue tape than the base of the couch.
Correct.
So the jury, in having seen it, we were very clear it's approximate. In their minds, perhaps they want to think it could have been back of maybe a couple inches or not, but it's roughly in the place that it was.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
All right, you're free to go for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Next prosecution witness?
Thank you, Your Honor. The people call Joe Clayton.
Yes. Oh, hold on, Mr. Cowing. Well, maybe for now. Let me. Thank you, Cindy. I need counsel, please. Okay, question from the jury. When the reconstruction was an approximation, how close was it? Was it close in inches, feet? I mean, how far off was it?
I would say inches.
Okay. The wear marks on the back of the couches make it look like they were up against the back wall. So what was the point if it's not a real reconstruction? Can you answer that?
I can't, I mean, this couch was removed. The marks on the back of the couches, I'm not sure what they could be.
Okay. Anything else from either side?
Yes, Your Honor. So, Investigator Cowing, perhaps I didn't ask the right questions going into this, but are there going to be issues later in the case where the jury, it may be relevant to them, the size of the living room in general?
I don't think so.
Let me ask a different question.
Yeah.
In the investigation, was it a relevant fact to you, given some of the things you're investigating, the size of the living room?
Asked and answered.
No, it's a different question.
So let me ask the question, and let me try to ask a good question. Okay. In terms of the size of the living room during your investigation, having been in that room, was the size of that room relevant to some things in the investigation?
Yes.
And these types of things that it was relevant to, are they things that are down to 1 inch or 2 inch, or are they just things that it was helpful to be in the room and see the size of it for?
Your Honor, if I may, with the limited scope of what's what this witness has been allowed to testify about and how we have been restricted in what we can ask, this is a really big question. Essentially, is this relevant with respect to an investigation that spanned a long time? So we object unless the court wants to extend the scope of this witness right now.
We're not going to extend the scope of the witness, but this is relevant to this actual proceeding in terms of what the jury just saw and whether or not the fact that it's an approximation or not an approximation is important to them. So go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Investigator Cowling, let me try to ask this and stay right on the point that we're making, right? Have you ever heard that football is a game of inches?
Yes,
Whether you cross the goal line can be an inch or not an inch?
correct.
But for the purposes of what we're talking about in the living room, your investigation didn't have questions that hinged on 1 inch. Was it more the room itself, like getting a feeling for what the room looked like?
Correct.
That said, you got out a tape measure and reconstructed that from the pictures and measurements that you had accurately.
Yes,
But whether they were pushed up exactly against the back of the wall, that's not the purpose for the reconstruction, is it?
that's not the purpose, no.
Okay. Did you find it helpful as you investigated this case to have
I'm
been...
going to stop you there. You got
Okay,
what you need to do.
understood, Your Honor.
Do you have anything based solely on that?
Is that room big enough to throw a football in?
It's a fairly small room.
The question is, could a ball travel through the air in that room, or is it so small that a ball could not be thrown?
It's possible.
Sure. The way that it was reconstructed, you mentioned on third redirect that it was inches, not feet. You believe the approximation, but you don't know with respect to how far the coffee table is from the couch was to the TV stand. We could be talking about feet because you never took those measurements, right?
I don't believe so.
So you have faith enough in your approximation that you don't think that you're off by 12 or more inches on any of the things in that room.
I believe it's accurate.
You're guessing, right?
No,
But you're not basing it on measurements taken.
correct.
That's it, thanks.
Okay. Now you can step down. Thank you very much. You're good to go, Mr. Kelly. How long's direct on your next witness?
Certainly more than a half hour, Your Honor. What are you thinking?
Well, I'm just wondering if we should take a break or not. Do you guys want to go for 20, 30 minutes, or do you want to take a break now? Keep going? All right. I'll break around 3, maybe a little bit before. Okay?
Thank you, Your Honor. The people call Joe Clayton.